All right, moving on to the Valley of Mexico. If we were looking at a modern map today, we would be looking at Mexico City. So that's exactly where we are in the world. Mexico City sits now right on top of this lake that we see here. This is a great place for farmers, again, because of the rather large lake system here. Plus, we have some volcanoes in these mountain ranges, and volcanic ash actually helps to put nutrients into the soil, so the soils are pretty fertile here. For most of the pre-classic period, this area was pretty sparsely settled. So there are no significant signs of farming communities. And the reason being is that it would have been hard to do farming right off because the plants had to be adapted from the tropical lowlands to these cooler highland environments. So we primarily see relatively small, like, hamlets emerge. However, by about 2800 BP, we do start to see some significant communities arise. And one of the first ones we're going to talk about here is Quiquilco. And you can see here it's on this kind of southwestern part of the lake in the southern valley. So this is a pretty substantial settlement, and it has pyramid mounds, so you can see here. And no, it's not a landing pad for spaceships, as some people have claimed. It was built by the ancient pre-Columbians that lived in this particular area. So we have these temple platforms. So what is this a sign of? Complexity. Hopefully you were saying that into your head. Social complexity. We know that Quiquilco had control of obsidian trade from this particular area. We find obsidian from the Valley of Mexico all over Mesoamerica. So that's Quiquilco, and here's what some of the ruins look like more up close. Now, around 2500 to 2200 BP, Teotihuacan was established. The reason that's kind of a broad time frame is because later building of this community kind of wiped out some of the earlier settlement. And this is up in the northern area, so Teotihuacan, the place where men become gods. And that's actually the name that the Aztec gave to it, so it's a Nahuatl term. So, this is an area of good agricultural land, another good place to obtain obsidian. And it does appear that it was in competition with Quiquilco. So you have these two settlements. Now Quiquilco was actually winning this particular competition until a very interesting thing happens. We have volcanic eruptions. So Mount Chitli erupts multiple times and buries most of Quiquilco. So there's the first eruption buries about 31 square miles, and then it continues to erupt over a long period of time, and it actually spreads pretty much out of there south into the Puebla Tlaxcala regions. At the same time, we see rapid population growth at Teotihuacan. And Teotihuacan is both the name of the city and the state. So again, it is the place where men become gods. Sometimes it's interpreted as a place where gods live. So anyways, we're not really sure. But here's a nice little picture of the ruins as they are today. Much of it has been reconstructed. So by 1999 BP, Teotihuacan was a state-level society. Again, most of the words that we use for this particular city are Nahuatl, which was the language of the Aztecs. The Aztecs believed this particular site was sacred, obviously, if it's the place where people become gods or where gods live. The Aztec also named the two major pyramids and the major kind of thoroughfare. It controlled pretty much everything in the Valley of Mexico. It was in a very strategic position. It was in one of the very few kind of natural entrances to the valley itself. So that old real estate maxim, location, 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 really does kind of hold true for Teotihuacan also. Their influence spread throughout all of Mesoamerica. I mean, we find it in the Maya region, we find it with the Zapotec, we find it down in Guatemala, the Highland Maya. I mean, they really did have a huge realm of influence. And they actually, we find that elite from all over Mesoamerica are trying to align themselves with the ruling party in Teotihuacan. So it's the economic power for hundreds of years in Mesoamerica. By 1350 BP, it's the sixth largest city in the world and the largest in Mesoamerica. We're going to talk a little bit about the population size in just a minute. This elite ruling class was supported through trade and tribute revenues. And what they did was, at the time where we see the population like explode in Teotihuacan, it really kind of bottoms out in what are called the hinterlands, so outside of the city area itself. So it seems like they brought people to the city, trained them up into being good Teotihuacanos, and then sent some of them back out into the hinterlands to get raw materials to send back up into the city. Some were doing agriculture, some were of course mining for obsidian, some were getting clays for pots, and so forth and so forth. Monumental architecture, huge stuff here. It's well planned out. It took archaeologists 5 years to map just this kind of center city area. It does appear that the rulers mobilized the population using religious fervor. So in our modern world, we can kind of understand religious fervor and how it works. Again, if you're in the place where the cosmos began, then everybody has this kind of sacred obligation to contribute to these monuments to the gods and the universe. So this is one of the ways, by constructing these huge pyramids and making a lot of the carvings and paintings and so forth, that the Teotihuacanos maintained their universe. Now the site itself is kind of laid out perpendicular to the local landscape, so it's aligned with significant points on the horizon, and it's also aligned with the movement of the stars. Now the buildings themselves look kind of plain when you look at them today, but back in the day they would have been plastered and then painted with polychrome murals, and on some of the insides of the buildings we actually still have some of those polychrome murals. So we have two primary buildings here. We have the Pyramid of the Moon down here. That was the first pyramid, and then the Pyramid of the Sun, which is actually the large primary pyramid. Now the Pyramid of the Moon back here replicates Cerro Gordo, which is actually, you can't see it in this picture, but it's a mountain behind, and it almost perfectly mimics it. And it was built over a series of time. It took about 200 years. They didn't put burials in it at first, but we do see some burials in the later stages. Now, the Pyramid of the Sun is the primary monument. It's a big one. The base is as big as the Great Pyramid at Giza, although it's not quite as tall. It's only 207 feet. But you can see how large it is because in this picture there are people in it, but it's pretty hard to tell exactly that they're people when you start going up here. So it's a fairly steep climb. This particular pyramid is set over a cave entrance, again, those sacred caves. So it's almost like the rulers are placing themselves over the home of the rain gods. Again, that's a good way to consolidate some power. The Pleiades annual pre-dawn appearance comes up right over the main stairway. So again, that's some of that astronomical alignment. And that just happens to coincide with the beginning of the rainy season. So again, farming going to be critical to this particular society. So this pyramid seems to be all about water and rain and so forth. It is aligned with the mountains and the setting sun, and in Mesoamerica, pyramids are basically artificial mountains, and if there's a temple sitting on top, we believe that represented one of the sacred caves where the feathered serpent lived. The Great Pyramid itself was built in a single building episode, so it wasn't like they built a small one and then built a bigger one over it. This was built in one episode. It took a long time to do it, and it is dedicated, we think, to the great goddess, which seems to be one of the principal deities. Now, since other things are kind of associated with rain, then we could make the leap that the great goddess is also associated with rain and agriculture. So the Street of the Dead, it's a nice picture here, is the Pyramid of the Sun, and this is actually taken from the Pyramid of the Moon, looking down the Street of the Dead. It is lined with both civic and ceremonial buildings. Probably the elites are going to live closest to this particular area. There's also a great compound, which was a marketplace that is on the Street of the Dead as well.